Joining me now to discuss President Obama's most daunting challenges abroad is Michael Moschella of the Truman National Security Project. It's an organization that promotes progressive security and foreign policy goals for the U.S. Also with me, Jim Phillips. He's the Senior Research Fellow for Middle Eastern Affairs at the conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation. I want to welcome both of you to the show.
Thank you, Mike.
Let's start with that. His challenges in the second term when it comes to foreign policy. I'll start with you, Jim. How do you see him?
Well, I think first and foremost, from a Washington point of view, is the Iran nuclear question. It seems that by the end of this year, there must be a resolution, either diplomatically or through the possible use of military force. At least that's what Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has suggested. And I think Iran looms very large, not only on the radar screen of Washington, but it should also in China and among many other powers around the world.
Michael?
Well, that's a good point. And clearly Iran is one of the most dangerous regimes in the world. They're trying to get their hands on one of the world's most dangerous weapons. And it's an example of success of the Obama administration. One of the reasons why we were watching a clip of him at his second inauguration. Now, when Obama came into office in 2008, Iran was on the rise and getting more powerful as a result of failed policies. And what's happened now is through the stiffest sanctions in really recent history, modern history, Iran is isolated, surrounded by enemies, and growing weaker by the day. Their currency is crippled. Now, the question is, what folks like Jim say is maybe we should start to go to war with Iran, and no credible military person thinks that that's a good idea. It could have really tough repercussions. What we have actually done is set forth a course that's working, and we should continue to play that out.
But Jim, conservatives would say that perhaps the president hasn't been tough enough. Isn't that a correct assessment?
Oh, that's correct, because although Congress has imposed the toughest sanctions ever on Iran over the objections of the Obama administration, sanctions alone are not going to stop Iran's nuclear drive any more than they stopped North Korea. I think what is needed beyond sanctions is also the credible threat of military force. And what worries me is that with the nomination of Senator Hagel, who is already on record for not only opposing the use of force, but opposing sanctions, then that is a dangerous signal to send to Iran that may lead that regime to overplay their hand, as they have done many times before, continue on their present path. And by the way, when President Obama came to office, they didn't have any mid-level enriched uranium, but now they have enough for, if it was further refined, for up to 3 or 4 nuclear weapons. So they have made tremendous progress on the nuclear front despite sanctions.
But there are some who would say the United States has already gone to that region. They've gone to Iraq. The results are not that good. And the U.S. should not be the world's policeman. What would you say to them?
Well, I don't think the U.S. By itself wants to be or can afford to be the world's policeman. But as President Obama has warned, if Iran continues on its present course, all options are on the table. And I think that's the message the administration needs to reinforce. And I think by nominating Senator Hagel as Secretary of Defense, it's undermining that message.
Well, let's be clear. It's funny because you didn't see a whole lot of Heritage Foundation people criticizing a conservative senator from Nebraska named Chuck Hagel for the last 10 years, right? Now, all of a sudden, when he's joining the Obama cabinet, now it's time to take a political shot. The question is really what's best for the country. And we know that Chuck Hagel, as Secretary of Defense, is going to report to the Obama administration. And it's one of the administrations that's been phenomenal on foreign policy. They've taken out, obviously, the top terrorists in the world, Osama bin Laden, and many of the other top al-Qaeda leaders. They've had successes around the globe. He was, again, in part re-elected because of this. And so I think as Chuck Hagel joins a really good and proven national security team in the White House, the folks who are executing those sanctions against Iran, that it'll be a really good fit, and it'll be good for the military, and it'll be good for the country.
I want to talk about this changed president, first administration second. His inaugural address in 2009, he said, "To the Muslim world, we seek a new way forward based on mutual interest and mutual respect." Didn't hear that this time around. To those who cling to power through corruption and deceit and the silencing of dissent, know that you are on the wrong side of history, but that we will extend a hand if you are willing to unclench your fist. Again, this time around, we heard something in the neighborhood. This is one phrase I picked up. We will support democracy from Asia to Africa, from the Americas to the Middle East. Seems like maybe he was stung the first time around. The rhetoric is a little bit different this time around. I want to get both of you to chime in.
Obama doesn't need to prove that he's tough. The proof is in the last 4 years of action. When he came into office, you had a senator who had been only in the Senate for a few years and didn't have a ton of foreign policy experience. I think now, coming into his second term, it's a very clear record of success. And so you can start to focus on sort of some of the big picture, carrot and stick issues, right? We're going to be strong, but also we're going to care about things like allies. We're going to promote human development around the world. And these are things that, as a toolkit, keep America as a global leader, not just, hey, can we bomb Iran?
But they weren't really unclenching the fist. The Muslim world, he's had his issues there. I mean, would you think that he's a different president this time around?
Well, I hope he's more realistic, because I think there was a lot of wishful thinking in the first term about engaging Iran. The administration tried with that speech right from the beginning in his first his first interview. And the Iranian regime showed that it won't unclench its fist, because its fist is around the throat of its own people, and it thinks it'll be overthrown if it does unclench its fist. I think the Obama administration also tried to engage Syria, which had a zero effect, and I would argue was disastrous. And unfortunately, Senator Kerry, who was one of the advocates of engaging Syria, is now in a position of Secretary of State. I hope, or is nominated to be Secretary of State. I hope he's a lot more realistic in the future.
I'm glad Jim brings this up, because this is a big defining difference between a president like Obama and some of the conservatives who had some really serious foreign policy failures under Bush. And the difference is, where do you start? What's the starting point? It's the starting point with trying to use a host of other tools and trying to build alliances and work in a community, and then you can ratchet up. You can ratchet up to, hey, maybe we'll use force. Or is the starting point, hey, let's threaten you. And let's get into a place where we might have to go and have a costly invasion in Iraq, have another 10-year war, stress the military. And history has proven that when we do what Obama has done, when we use that approach of starting with a level of presumed trust and then ratcheting up, that we always do a lot better, for one major reason. The question is, what comes after bombing? What comes after war? And this is stuff that the Heritage Foundation and guys like Jim, who argued for, hey, let's stay in war forever, let's stay in Iraq forever, never leave Afghanistan, they can't answer that question.
Well, I don't remember arguing that we should stay at war forever. I argue we should focus on winning a war and not merely ending a war, as the Obama administration is on the verge of doing in Afghanistan, and we'll see what the implications of that are. When the Obama administration went into Libya, it had a lot less allies than the U.S. did when it went into Iraq. If you think that number of allies is the key indicator
we know
of
that
success.
That's not true. We know that when Obama went into Libya, that it was at the request of pretty much the entire global community, and when we went into Iraq, that it was very controversial.
And then, what was the payoff for going into Libya? The Benghazi attack, and I think one other reason why President Obama dropped some of the rhetoric in the second inaugural speech is that, according to the Pew Global Survey, U.S. policy is much less popular in the Arab and the Muslim world now under President Obama than it was under President Bush. And so I think the administration hopefully will rethink its policies in the second term.
I want to push back on something that Jim said about Libya, because Libya, the payoff was that we prevented a slaughter of millions of people. And that's a payoff that we believe in as a country that stands for human rights. And Libya was an example.
But some would say there's a slaughter going on in Syria, and
a
standing
much
on the
bigger
sideline.
slaughter.
Okay. And so this is the point of it. Now, Libya was an example where pretty much everybody around Libya wanted us to help. Right? There was a clear and defined role, and we were able to affect an outcome without the loss of American life. And we were able to put a country in arguably a much better position. There's a lot to be done, but a much better position. Now in Syria, it's a little different situation. It's a far more complex system. We've been doing a lot of work to help with the rebel groups, right? And so what you want to do is more targeted approaches. And so what you're thinking of as an Obama approach to foreign policy is understanding very clear payoffs, understanding very clear exit plans so that there's a high benefit to cost ratio, as opposed to, hey, let's mobilize the troops. We've had guys in 4 or 5 tours in Afghanistan right now. You know, let's drive up the debt and let's cause huge amounts of international turmoil. That's not a good idea.
I'm going to have to end it there. Thank you both for coming in. Certainly appreciate it. Thank you.